My name is Ranjan Ghosh. Most recently, I was the global head of digital manufacturing supply chain for ABB. I also helped develop the digital transformation framework and methodology for its customers. Prior to that, I spent about 14 years with General Electric or GE in several GE businesses, driving various initiatives, including developing a digital industrial strategy for one of the GE businesses. In my professional career, I have had the opportunity to work in multiple industries, including energy, automation, robotics, transportation, telecommunication, healthcare, insurance, and banking. Now, last year, I was invited to deliver a keynote speech in the same event. In that keynote, I talked about how Industry 4.0 technologies can transform the supply chain operations in the future. I used several use cases of different companies who are effectively leveraging emerging technologies in their operations. Now, what I did not know then is that the best use case of all of why we need to digitize our current supply chain processes was just around the corner. And that use case is the shortage of toilet paper. Only if I knew then that toilet paper would do a far better job of convincing digitization need in supply chain in a few months than I would with so many fantastic examples that I gave during my keynote speech. And it's not just toilet paper, right? During COVID-19 crisis, we saw shortages in many items like vegetables, dairy products, eggs, sanitary wipes, hand sanitizers, medical devices, drugs, and the list just went on. Now, let us try to understand the root cause of some of these shortages so that we can better prepare for tomorrow. Well, let's start with something that we cannot do without: toilet paper. Around early April, just as we always do, my wife and I were at a grocery store in one weekend. Now, when we are at a grocery store, no matter whatever I pick from the shelves, according to my wife, it is always the wrong item. I never seem to be able to pick the right items from the shelves. So my incompetence in grocery shopping usually leaves me with a lot of free time in my hand at the store, which I usually spend by either standing in one place or walking around the store. So that day I stood near the toilet paper aisle. What I noticed is that about 40% of the people came and directly headed towards a specific toilet paper brand. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Another 30% of the people were walking past the aisle when they turned around, looked how busy the aisle was, and then came and got their toilet paper. The remaining 30% were standing far away, watching others, and then chose to walk towards the aisle to go and get toilet paper. Panic buying and following what other people does is human nature and was a contributing factor for not just toilet paper shortage, but also for other grocery items. However, that is not what started the toilet paper shortage. I don't know how many of you know this, but the toilet paper that you pick from the stores for your house is not the same toilet paper used in restaurants, offices, hotels, hospitals, and other commercial places. They are either from a different manufacturer or the same manufacturer with a different quality of products that follows a totally different distribution network. So as everyone remained at home 24/7 during the lockdown period, they used restroom at home a lot more often than they did before, and that created more residential toilet paper demand, approximately 40% more consumer market toilet paper demand, according to Georgia Pacific. On the flip side, there were 40% excess supply of industrial toilet paper as no one visited the commercial places. Unfortunately, the supply chain channels were not resilient and flexible enough to understand that quickly and send the excess supply to the consumer market. So the same situation occurred with the dairy, meat, eggs, and other grocery items. People were eating at home more and eating out less, creating an excess demand and empty shelves in our grocery stores, while milk, eggs, vegetables, which were supposed to head to the restaurants and to schools, were simply just destroyed and thrown away. Now, some of these shortages, like hand sanitizers and sanitizing wipes, were purely due to the increased unexpected demand. Pre-COVID-19, very few of us thought about wiping hands with sanitizers 30, 40 times a day. The reason shortage for hand sanitizers lasted for so long, though, is because the increased demand took a long time to go upstream in supply chain process and create additional demand in necessary raw materials. So what happened then in the drug market? Why would the drug prices for other medical conditions go up when we did not even have any proven treatment of COVID-19 itself? In fact, the drug prices started to go up in certain cases well before we went into lockdown in many countries. Now, what many may not know is that India is the largest generic medicine manufacturer of the world. And 70% of India's raw materials comes from China, which is the largest active pharmaceutical ingredient, or what is known as API, producer of the world. And 1/3 of that pharmaceutical raw materials comes from, guess where? Ground zero of COVID-19, Hubei province in China. So as Hubei province went into lockdown early this year, drug markets started to feel the effect due to mostly this single-threaded supply chain. In fact, 60% of the world's supply chain disruptions led back to China either through a primary or a secondary tier distribution network. So single-threaded supply chain can be an issue during times of disruption. Now, what this really means is that for us to avoid future supply chain disruptions, we need a supply chain process that is both resilient and flexible. And to meet that goal, many manufacturers are now talking about bringing portions, if not all of their production capability, closer to customers. Great, problem solved, right? Well, not quite. Here's the problem. For decades, our supply chain models have been built based on efficiency and cost reduction. It always has been, and it always will be, regardless of who tells you otherwise. The goal has always been, how do we deliver cheap products quickly to our customers? Now, when you throw in resiliency into that mix, it creates an issue. That is because efficiency and resiliency are somewhat competing priorities in traditional supply chain. How so? Well, for you to build resiliency in your supply chain process, most likely you will need to build a backup, a failover process. And there's a financial burden for doing just that. On the flip side, to be fully efficient and provide the cheapest product to your customer, you will need to eliminate any extra process steps and build product from the cheapest location possible, most likely with a single-threaded distribution channel to keep your costs down. Now, you may say, okay, Ranjan, I get your point, but my company will compromise some efficiency and profit for the sake of resiliency and risk mitigation. It makes sense, right? I mean, who wants to go through what we just went through in the last few months? What I will say to that is that for a short-term plan, that may be okay. But in the long run, that type of a compromise is just not sustainable for most industries. Even if you want to do that, your competitors will not allow you to do just that. Competition will demand absolute efficiency on your part for you to sustain in the industry. Whole world did not really move production from their countries to China only because it's a beautiful country with very nice people. They moved it because of its cheap labor. They moved it because of a distribution network that is reasonably free from political and environmental disruption. They moved it because of its technology and physical infrastructure that is hard to find in countries where labor cost is low. Although in recent days there has been some move towards finding alternative areas in Southeast Asia and South American countries, there are just not that many alternatives available yet. And a redundant supply chain network will always cost more under the traditional supply chain process, unless we find other ways, like using emerging technologies to reduce the overall cost structure. Let us now look at how some of these emerging technologies can help organizations mitigate some of these challenges that we saw during COVID-19, and how can those technologies help supply chain to be resilient while also being efficient. It is hard to manage how consumers feel during a crisis. It is, however, much easier to manage how the consumers behave. Let me give you an example. Most of you, I'm sure, have investments in stock market. In the stock market, there's a clear visibility of each stock and each stock index in real time. During disruption or for any other reason, if the stock price or index falls too rapidly, there's an automated mechanism named circuit breaker that kicks in to halt trading to allow the investors and market to settle down. Now, why can't we have something like that for the products that we purchase from retail stores? Why did most of the retailers not ration the necessity items like food and milk within a couple of days of the abnormal purchase patterns that we saw, instead of waiting for 2-3 months that they did in most cases? The reason they could not do that, though, is because for most products, we currently only have 1-tier visibility in supply chain. Retailers can only see how much stock there is in the regional distribution center. Regional distribution center can only see how much stock there is in the central distribution center. Central distribution center, if they are lucky, can only see how much manufacturers are forecasted to produce. That is where smart supply chain control tower or digital twin concept can really be helpful. They can help build that resiliency without compromising much efficiency. For example, Medtronic, one of the largest medical device manufacturers, they have created a digital twin of their end-to-end supply chain. Although it is in its early stage, this digital twin allowed them to react during pandemic in a timely manner. With a complete real-time supply chain visibility, many necessity product suppliers could have quickly understood the issue during pandemic to start rationing early and route products from the commercial and industrial distribution channel to retail and residential channel. Besides real-time visibility, digital twin with the help of AI can provide capability to run simulation analysis to optimize cost, inventory, and distribution speed. With the help of machine learning models, AI can forecast demand accuracy at a much more finite level and even can create a self-adjusting stock allocations. AI is the most hyped technology right now. In fact, there are 30 plus AI-related technologies that are grouped together under the overall AI umbrella. AI market is expected to grow to $733 billion by 2027. This topic is just simply too large for me to cover in any reasonable amount of detail in this keynote. Instead, I will leave you with this. Do not get too wrapped up comparing so many different AI-based solutions that are out there. Instead, spend more time understanding the AI technology capability and identifying use cases where you believe you have access to accurate historical data. Without accurate and widely acceptable data source within your organization, your AI initiative is likely going to fail. To build maximum resiliency, even if you want to bring in your primary production or your alternative production capability closer to your customer from a low-cost country, you will still need to make sure that your overall cost does not exceed to what it would have been in that low-cost country. That means to reduce labor cost, we will need to expand our focus on automation and robotics from the shop floors where they are used today to transportation, to logistics, and warehousing. Most products built today are far more complex than what similar product was even a decade ago. Think about the car that you drive. They have many more features and functionalities today than the car you had in 80s and 90s. In traditional manufacturing, with more features comes a lot more build complexity, and with more complexity comes a lot more sub-assemblies and parts, and along with it, many suppliers for you to deal with. To reduce production cost, as well as to reduce risk of supply chain disruption, you need to look into how your company can embed additive manufacturing technology during the production process. Now, I know that speed of production of additive technology, cost per unit, metal parts qualification has been some of the issues of using this technology in a mass production environment. However, there has been some notable improvements done in the technology in the last year or so for you to go back in there and look at this technology to see how you can start embedding this technology within your manufacturing platform. Along with additive technology, factories that can modularize their production and can adapt to demand changes will create agility without increasing a lot of cost. So you need to look into how within your manufacturing platform, you can modularize your current production capability so that you can build that agility within your manufacturing environment. We all have heard about the shortages of PPE equipment during COVID crisis. When China went into lockdown, there were limited visibility of other global non-traditional PPE suppliers who could have met the PPE demand. Even when some of those companies were known, medical facilities were not just sure if they could trust those suppliers to build quality products for them. Even when China came back online, the huge global demand of PPE overwhelmed their paper-based procurement process. In fact, this paper-based international shipment inefficiency cost the world about $200 billion every year. With a trust-based blockchain, medical providers could have quickly identified alternative suppliers of PPE and also remove the paper-based backlog that jammed the supply chain network. During COVID crisis, that is exactly what IBM did with their Rapid Supplier Connect blockchain network. It helped government agencies and healthcare industries identify new non-traditional suppliers that had pivoted to address the shortage of PPE with no intermediaries to deal with. One of the very few positives of COVID-19 has been that it has exposed all of us to the possibilities of remote working across industries, domain, and businesses. Those companies that had their critical systems and processes in the cloud had a lot less disruption to deal with than those who did not. After COVID-19, I believe the businesses will pay a lot more attention to making critical systems available on the cloud so that they can be remotely accessed by employees as they work from home. Now, you may say, look, pandemic-like disruption doesn't happen very often. In fact, the last major virus that hit us, SARS, that was in 2003. It was 17 years ago. And the last major pandemic was in 1918, Spanish flu. That was about 100 years ago. And both statements would be true. But here's the issue. When SARS virus hit, China contributed less than 4% of the world GDP. Today, China contributes more than 20% of the world GDP. So for the sake of resiliency, even if you move your production from China, it will move to another low-cost country because of the reasons we discussed earlier about efficiency. The point I'm trying to make here is that global trading is here to stay. And the adverse impact of small disruption in global trading is many times more today than it was even 5 years ago. So we no longer can afford even a small disruption in global supply chain, and we need to use the right digital technologies to build both resiliency and efficiency. Because when we fail to build resiliency, impact is a lot more than empty toilet paper shelves in our stores. It costs people lives due to the shortage in medical equipment and PPE. It costs people livelihood because businesses remain closed due to not having enough supply to meet the demand. And it forces those who are just less fortunate to go hungry because they simply just cannot afford the rising food prices.